Alright, hey guys, it's Chili. I make fan content for AOE4. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be I'm going to be taking a look at all the civs in the game, and we're going to try ranking them. We're going to try making a tier list based on which civs I think are designed the best. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to judge them based on three categories. One is accuracy, how true to history is this faction. Two is game feel, how good does the design feel, is it clunky? And lastly is thematics, which is kind of an overall rating. Does it really satisfy the fantasy that the civilization is trying to deliver? Now keep in mind this tier list has nothing to do with whether or not the civ is good in game, is it competitive. I'm not good enough of a player to judge that, although I did recently hit Conqueror this past week, so that's pretty cool. But if you want to get a tier list for the best civs, go watch Beastie or something. This is purely just based on which civs I think are designed the best. So let's jump right into it. We got this tier maker template here that Aussie Drongo kindly made. Thank you, Aussie Drongo. And let's start with the first one here, which is China. Now, if I have to think through how good China is designed. So there's a few cool things about China. China is the only civilization in the game that has multiple different versions of itself represented. There's multiple different dynasties that you can evolve through. I actually quite like that. There's a lot of good historical references. For instance, in the Yuan dynasty, your units move faster. Well, the Yuan dynasty is actually the Mongolian, is when the Mongols conquered China. So it kind of makes sense that the Mongol dynasty would move a little bit faster. And also the Song dynasty is when China was one of the golden ages for China historically, especially when they migrated to the south and southern Song. A lot of good civilization building there, so it kind of makes sense to have villagers being produced faster then. I lean towards making China a S tier rank on this. I think thematically it also fulfills the role pretty well. Your villagers build a lot faster. You got the Great Wall Gate house. It feels really good to build that, and ultimately your base looks very Chinese. You have a ton of villagers everywhere. They're all making stuff. You have a huge expansive farmland from the granaries. You have the imperial officials walking around doing the things that they're doing, and obviously having the nest of bees is really cool. Having all that like medieval Chinese rocketry, something that they were super famous for. So yeah, actually, I think I'm going to put China in the S tier. Oh, and one thing I really appreciate about the Chinese faction design is that they can build all of their landmarks, which is really cool because China is one of the civilizations in history that has built so many things throughout their span, and they've had a 6,000 year long civilization, so it's really cool to see it represented in that way. Let's move on to the next civ here, the Abbasids. So the Abbasids in the game, they're all about their camels. They have the best spears in the game. They have some of the best archers in the game. Everything's centered around the House of Wisdom. And I don't think historically we actually know what the House of Wisdom looked like. So it was really cool that the devs kind of like took inspiration from there being some kind of House of Wisdom, and then creating this faction that's centered around building, researching the technology of aging up instead of just building a landmark to age up. And additionally, because we don't know what the House of Wisdom looks like, it's cool that they made this fantasy building have these different wings that you can kind of construct to evolve through, and it allows for there to be a very in a landscape where every other faction has two landmarks to choose from as you age up. It creates a little bit of diversity to have a faction that can choose between 4 different wings. So I think that that's actually a really creative implementation. What's sad though is that the Civ doesn't have, I mean, there were a lot of amazing works of architecture in the Abbasid Empire, and across the Muslim, all the Muslim empires, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Ayyubids, the Fatimids, that's just not being represented here as a result of this House of Wisdom design. So it's a little bit sad that we're kind of missing out on some of the amazing architecture, but and considering that the Abbasids are basically the representative civ for the Arab empires, it's kind of sad that we're kind of missing out on that. But I still think that overall the design is quite good. I will say that the wonder that they chose, the Prayer Hall of Uqba, which is located in Tunisia, it looks really bland. It actually doesn't even look like a wonder. I wish they would pick a different thing, like the spiral minaret, or there's so many other great wonders that they could have chosen. But I still would put this in an S tier category. I think this is one of the better designed civs. It has a lot of design diversity without being while having units that are pretty true to both Abbasid and Mamluk history. Oh, it would be really cool. I did read that the Abbasids actually also represent the Mamluks later on in their ages. It would have been really cool to have some like Mamluk unique unit. That might be something that they'll do with the Abbasid Lancer at some point, is call them Mamluks instead, perhaps. Yeah, overall I really like the Abbasid design. Was there anything else I wanted to say about the Abbasids? Their units can make siege weapons on the field. I don't know what that's a reference to. I guess historically historically, when Genghis Khan conquered Baghdad and basically destroyed it, conquered the Abbasid Empire and took it over, he was able to take the Muslim siege engineers and bring them with him to help him in other sieges, especially in China. So there were a lot of Muslim and Persian siege engineers that were brought over to China to help take down the rest of the Song dynasty. So that could be a reference to that. Actually, in game, this is represented by the Hui Pao. It's one of the special units that can be constructed from I think it's called the Khaganate Palace. Hui is actually the Muslim ethnicity in China, so I think it's a reference to that, basically a Muslim trebuchet. So I think I like that technology, or I like that ability for the Abbasids. I think the overemphasis on camels is a little bit something I would have changed. A lot of the civilizations in this game use camels at some time in their warfare. The Malians, for instance. Delhi Sultanate had camels, so it's a bit of a shame that there's only one civ that has camels, and they have both camel riders and camel archers. Let's move on though. The next civ here is English. English I really like. I really like the design of the English. I'm gonna put this at the very top actually. I actually feel like the devs put the most effort into the English because they knew that this was gonna be their poster child civilization. They knew that this was going to be the first one that everyone tries. It was going to be the one that the campaign centers around as well. So I really like what they did. It is a very defensive faction, very noob friendly. Their influence bonus centers around their farm. It teaches people to place farms around their mill. Yeah, I like that. I like all that. Obviously, the English villagers have some of the best phrases in the game. Icha worka. You know, I feel like the English are one of the best design civs in the game. Having longbowmen feels really good in the game, and it kind of satisfies the English design theme, which is centered around basically there's three like basic starter civilizations: the English, the French, and the Holy Roman Empire. And the English are basically the archer civ. They have long range archers. They have a keep in the what's it called, the Berkshire Palace. It's basically the long range super keep. The French have the high damage super keep, and the HRE have the tanky super keep. So it all kind of, I really like that they kind of went with these really basic, easy designs for the civilizations that they knew were going to be the most popular. And speaking of which, let's move. Oh, I will say this though. One thing I don't like about the English design is that they added the Wineguard units, Wineguard Rangers and Wineguard Footmen. They're both kind of random. I was originally, when I originally saw the Wineguard Ranger design, I thought they were just gonna be called Rangers, or they're gonna be maybe like a reference to like I don't know, the like Welsh archers or something like that. But instead they made this like weird fantasy unit that is super niche in a landmark that people rarely build, and you don't really have many opportunities to use them. So it's kind of a shame that they even added those units. But you know, I would still put this faction at the very top. Let's move on to oh, and I will say that the network of castles buff I don't know what that's a reference to. I know that England had a lot of castles distributed across the country, especially when they were fighting, when they took over Wales. Wales was particularly hard for the English to conquer, and they would oftentimes rise up in rebellion. So the English, after the William the Conqueror, I think it was William the Conqueror, or his descendants, they conquered Wales. They basically set up a bunch of castles there to make sure that to basically pacify the Welsh people, make sure that they don't rise up in revolt again. And that's why to this day, most of the castles in England that are still standing are in Wales. So it could be a reference to that. I've never heard of it called a network of castles, but it kind of makes sense, I guess. Yeah, let's move on to the next civ though. Next up is France. France I also really like. I love hitting the Imperial Age with this faction, and hearing this I don't know what it is, like the strings come in and it sounds like you're like rolling through the French countryside. The way the French knights sound is the way the French knights sound is amazing. When they're charging, they sound so chivalrous and so full of it. And historically, the French were very centered around their knights. It was actually interesting. During the 100 Years' War between England and France, England was more known for having dismounted knights, which is probably why England has stronger men-at-arms. I think the stronger men-at-arms for England, it's a little bit random. They have this technology called armor cladding, which is kind of vague, because a lot of folks had strong armor. I don't know why only English men-at-arms have particularly unique armor. I'm guessing it's a reference to both the Huscarls from the Saxon days, because they do say Huskarle when they're walking around. But I think it's also a reference to the fact that during the 100 Years' War, England fought with dismounted knights, fighting in infantry formations instead of on horseback. This is famously what happened during the Battle of Agincourt. I think also Poitiers. The English knights dismounted and would be able to fight more effectively in the muddy terrain compared to the French knights who got bogged down. Their horses kind of sank in the muddy terrain there. Yeah, but ultimately, yeah, I think France having the Royal Knight specialty is really cool. I would have liked them not being called something as basic as Royal Knights. Royal Knights just sounds really generic. It would have been cool to have them be called gendarmes, which is like a term that they were called back then, and it's a term that actually extends all the way to today. The gendarmerie are basically the police forces in a lot of European countries. But in all fairness, gendarme translates literally to man-at-arms, so it would be kind of confusing to have French man-at-arms and then French gendarmes. So I can see why they kind of stuck with the Royal Knights. Maybe they could be called Royal Gendarmes or something like that. I just feel like having more unique names sounds a little bit cooler. Their other unique unit is the Arbitraire. That one I'm not as much of a fan of, because the French, especially during the 100 Years' War, they were known for fighting against English longbows with their crossbowmen, but these were not French crossbowmen necessarily. Usually they were mercenary crossbowmen from Genoa, or various other Italian city-states. So famously, I think it was Poitiers. There was basically a duel between the Genoese crossbowmen and the English longbowmen, and the English longbowmen basically tore the Genoese crossbowmen apart. This was in part due to the fact that it was raining, and so the crossbows were wet and they weren't working properly, and also the crossbowmen weren't able to didn't have the time to deploy their pavises, which are these big tower shields. So they were just kind of standing out in the open, getting destroyed. The longbowmen could shoot multiple arrows in a minute, whereas the Genoese crossbowmen take a lot of time to like wind up their crossbows, and basically they got slaughtered. And then as they were fleeing, the French, either through confusion or because they were upset that the mercenaries were fleeing, they charged down their own guys and then charged the English line, and they all died. All the French knights died. It was a very devastating battle for them. Hopefully I'm not getting that battle incorrect. I think it was Poitiers, but feel free to correct me in the comments below if I'm misremembering this. So it kind of makes sense. I get why they have special crossbowmen with pavises, but it also feels a little bit random. It would have been nice to see some other unit represented, maybe like a Volgier or like Sergeants. These are some of the some units that you will see in other games represented by the French. Because having the arbitraire on the French side means that it kind of boxes out the potential of a future Italian civ. If there was like a civ that represented Venice or the Italian city-states, it would make sense for them to have a Pavese crossbowman. In Age of Empires 3, the Italians have the Pavese crossbowman as one of their unique units. So it's kind of a shame that we kind of box that out with the French design here. So for that reason, I'll put it at the lower end of the S tier, but in general, I do like the design. It makes sense that the French are kind of like they're more offensive. They're more aggressive compared to the other civs, and their special keep in Age 4, the Red Palace, is basically like the super strong keep. I will say it's a little bit ridiculous that it kind of machine guns down your units if you're not looking, especially if your siege weapons are in range. That's a little bit weird, but yeah, I get it. It's a cool design. Holy Roman Empire. This civ. Wow, I got way too many S tier civs. I got to think about this again. Holy Roman Empire. What do I like about that? I'm gonna put this in. Actually, I might put this in B or C tier. Actually, this is the first civ I'm not the biggest fan of. They have 2 unique units only, which is the Prelate and the Landsknecht. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I'm just gonna go with Landsknecht. Historically, Landsknecht were more like pike formations. They were mercenaries. They certainly fought in the Holy Roman Empire, something that they're famous for, but it also makes sense to have them represented with the two-handed Zweihander type of weapon, because there were some units within the Landsknecht that were the Doppelsnolders. They got paid twice as much. That's what the Doppelsnolder is a reference to, and they would have these two-handed swords there to disrupt the pike formations, and they would kind of fight in the front lines there. But overall, it was like the whole unit was called Landsknecht, so it kind of makes sense that like they'd make this two-handed swordsman called a Landsknecht. And having a prelate is cool. Being centered around relics, I can see why. I mean, they're called the Holy Roman Empire, so they're very, obviously they have a lot of religious ties there, but I don't know, there's other civs that could have been relic focused. The defensive focus for the Holy Roman Empire is actually also really strange. I don't know why they gave the Holy Roman Empire like the auto repair ability. That's I'm not sure what that's a reference to. The cheaper the cheaper emplacements is also like I'm not quite understanding why. I think the devs were thinking more about gameplay with this faction. Certainly to play it feels really good. It's very straightforward. There's a kind of a linear build path that you go on. And Age 3, the HRE Knights, some of the sexiest looking knights in the game, all that metal armor. Actually, it looks a little bit too good for Age 3, because it actually looks better than their Age 4 version of the knight. The men-at-arms, awesome. I love it. I love that they made the HRE the infantry civ compared to the English and the French. The French are the cavalry civ, the English are the archer civ, the HRE is the infantry civ. So having really strong men-at-arms makes a lot of sense for them. And having these like heavy infantry with maces and gothic helmets is really cool, but a little bit random. It's not necessarily representative of what HRE acted like historically. So what would have been cool instead is if they took some inspiration from maybe some Czech units, because Czechoslovakia was, or what is now Czechoslovakia, what was then just like Prague. They had a lot of they had a very unique army led by Jan Žižka that was able to fight during the Hussite Wars. So war wagons, you've heard of them if you played Age of Empires 3. If you played Age of Empires 2, you've heard of war wagons. Having the Hufnis, these are all like really cool weapons that are kind of unique to that area, and like they're not explicitly part of the Holy Roman Empire, but they're associated, and so it would have made sense to maybe have those unique units represented by this faction. Certainly, I don't think that there's going to be a Czech faction in the future. It seems like too small compared to the relatively massive empires that are represented in the game so far. So I would like to see those units represented. And then I've also seen a lot of people ask for Teutonic Knights. I can see why, like the Teutonic Knights were they kind of colonized the northern regions near Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, that region, and they look really badass in history. I don't think the Teutonic Knights are going to be their own faction, so it kind of it would make sense to have them like represented by the German faction in some way. And then now I think about it, also the wonder for HRE is really weird. It's based off of a Danish castle. I think Castle Helsingborg, I think it's called. But that Danish castle is represented in game as basically a star fort. But it wasn't a star fort until like the 1700s or something like that, way outside of the time period. Star forts weren't really relevant until gunpowder technology really matured. So I feel like they could have picked a different wonder there. And actually, now the more I think about it, the more I really don't like the way this civ was designed. This might be a D. I'm gonna put it all the way down for now. This civ is one that I would probably change significantly. Let's move on to the next one here, the Mongols. I like the Mongols a lot. But I'm gonna put it at B, I think. There's a lot of things that they did right. I love seeing the Khan. I love the way they designed all the like unique faction mechanics, the fact that it doesn't have population concerns. This is very similar to the Lakota in Age of Empires 3. The Lakota also had a 200 pop from the beginning. It allows you to kind of mass up a huge army in the very beginning of the game, especially like a huge cavalry army, kind of roam around the map. It delivers the fantasy of like a Mongol horde riding through your farmlands, you know, pillaging your trade and your town centers. That's done really well. I think the new update to the Keshik is also really good, making them heal, kind of incentivizes the player to kind of attack buildings and start burning stuff down. It synergizes really well with the Khan's signal arrows, which boost attack speed, boost armor. Having those signal arrows represented period is also really cool. I wasn't aware that signal arrows were a thing, especially with like the kind of rocket design that they have in game, but I can buy it. I can see how that would be history for this faction. Their Cognate Palace, being able to recruit troops from across their empire, Chinese units, Rus units, makes a lot of sense. I love that. The Uvu, really cool mechanic. I will say though, one thing that I think the devs were going for, and I remember watching early promotional videos for the Mongols, they basically talked about how the Mongol faction would be able to pick up their base and migrate from Uvu to Uvu, kind of simulating a nomadic experience. I haven't seen anyone actually play the game like that. It's way too clunky to pick up your buildings and move them around. It would be really cool if the devs could somehow like make that a nicer feeling experience, because right now, like, the moment I pick up my buildings, it takes so long to place them back down, and they're always like the buildings always like kind of forget that I told them to get placed down, or like a unit kind of got in the way and the building just kind of like stops moving. That stuff is super clunky, super annoying, so no one actually like moves around with the Uvus. But in general, I like the idea of like not being able to mine stone and then not being able to build keeps or walls. It kind of like synergizes with this kind of open-ended faction. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the outposts for the Mongols cannot, like, late game Mongol players will take their excess stone and just spam bombard towers everywhere. That to me doesn't really speak to the historical reality of the Mongol Empire. The Yam network is really cool, having like building these outposts along your trade, kind of facilitating this Silk Road style trade civilization is really awesome. But having the bombard towers everywhere is just feels really weird. Like, anytime you go into a Mongol base, you don't see walls, but you see just an absolute festering of towers with bombards on them, and it's just disgusting to try to take it over. Same thing goes for the ranches that they have, or not ranches, the pastures that they have. The building just looks like a crab. It's kind of gross. It looks like something out of the Zerg faction in StarCraft or something like that. So I don't know why they went with that. Yeah, ultimately I think there's good and bad in this faction design. So I'm gonna place them at a B. I love the Mongol Horde stuff, but there's a lot of nuances here that could have been done a little bit better. Next up is the Rus. Rus, I'm gonna place them at A for now, and I'm gonna think about it for a little bit. I really like the wooden fortress. It's interesting that they don't have access to stone walls, and they build a stronger wooden wall. Historically, the Rus did build walls. Certainly, the walls of Moscow were quite famous, famously built with white stone. And it's cool that they added the ability for the Rus to be able to build stone walls later in the game. So I like that's still included. The emphasis on knights early makes a lot of sense. Historically, the Russian Druzina, they're basically, it translates to companions, but these are like heavily armored warriors going off on adventures, and they were very distinct in Rus culture, and also look really cool and very unique compared to other European knights. So I love the way those guys got represented in the game. It would have been cool for them to just be a unique unit, just call them Druzina, and then you can run around with badass Druzina instead of early knights, which sounds a lot less cool. Let me think, what else is the unique unit? The Streltsy, love that those guys are represented. It's so funny to me that in Age of Empires 3, the Streltsy are some of the weakest units in the game, but you get to Age of Empires 4, and it's like the Streltsy are some of the most badass units in the game, super strong, especially when you mass them late game. What else is unique for the Rus? The Warrior Monks, I like that reference, that did happen historically. I appreciate that the Rus are kind of like a Viking mixed culture. There's a lot of references to that. I would say Warrior Monk kind of falls into that category. Any other unique units that the Rus have? Oh, the Horse Archer. Okay, the Horse Archer, that's a reference to... I mean, the Rus had Horse Archers, but it could also be a reference to like the Kumans, who kind of lived in the same area. The Kumans were a faction in Age of Empires 2, but we don't really see Kumans in AOE4. Oh yeah, and then of course the Kremlin Gremlins, the militia. The militia are wielding these big-ass bardishas, which looks really cool, but they don't deal quite the same amount of damage that it looks like they should deal. It's a little bit weird to have militia for the Rus, but I can get it. Like, I see it. It makes sense. I can see why they would design it like that. Overall, I really like the architecture that they have for the Rus. It's all very wooden centered. Historically, the Rus aren't necessarily like a faction that used wood way more than the other civs. I mean, I guess it did, but like they also had plenty of stone buildings, so it's a little bit weird that they're all like kind of wood focused. But I can see that they would add it like that just to create more faction diversity. Yeah, overall, I would say... Actually, you know what? I'm going to put the Rus in the S tier. I think these guys are not... these guys are pretty well designed overall. I have no issues with them. In fact... Oh, I will say, here's one thing. I completely forgot to mention this, but the hunting cabin bonus and the hunting bonus, that one feels a little bit iffy. So initially, when the Vikings were coming down into modern day Russia along the Volga River, they were kind of colonizing it, mixing in with the Slavs. A lot of the incentive for that was basically to hunt for furs, gather pelts, trade. So kind of, I think the hunting cabins are kind of a reference to that. They generate gold because you can imagine like fur trappers are out there hunting. But then, and it kind of goes into the idea of like your scouts early game are running around hunting, but it also creates this like, I don't know, I don't feel that good both playing as the Rus or playing against the Rus, dealing with that little hunting mini game. Like no other faction has anything quite like that. And when you play up against the Rus, it kind of demands that you, like, if you don't go at least 2 scouts, if not 3 scouts, to counter the Rus and try to kill their deer, then you're gonna struggle significantly. And so it forces like this really weird playstyle from the other player, and that's just so different from the other civs. I both appreciate what it's trying to do, but it's also like it feels relatively clunky to do something like that. So I would, yeah, I still like it though. Overall, it's on the lower end of S tier. I really have to break up this S tier at some point. Delhi Sultanate. Okay, this one's a D. I'm not a fan of the Delhi Sultanate, their design. I don't know what the scholars are a reference to. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot of scholars in the Delhi Sultanate, but it's not clear to me, at least, that historically the Delhi Sultanate was all about their technology. The Abbasids, House of Wisdom, certainly. They were basically the preservers of antiquity. All the wisdom of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome was preserved through the Muslim scholars in the Abbasid Empire. It would have been really cool to see scholars for the Abbasid Empire, and it makes sense that the Abbasids have basically a House of Wisdom that's all about researching text. So like the Abbasids are very technology focused. I get that, but the Delhi Sultanate having this is like really strange. I don't get it. And also, even the inclusion of the Delhi Sultanate is really controversial. I'm not sure why the devs went with a non-Hindu civ to represent India, considering that in this game's relatively popular in India, and I think a lot of Indians would have wanted a Hindu civilization instead of the Delhi Sultanate, which is more of seen in India, at least, as more of like an invader civilization, a Muslim invader civilization. The origins of the Delhi Sultanate were the Ghazni, actually it's represented in the game. There's Ghazi Raiders, which are the Delhi's unique horsemen. I'm really glad that they added an additional unique unit on top of the elephants, because I feel like the war elephant and the tower elephant are going to be more generic units as they expand to other civilizations in the future. There's so many civs that just need elephants represented, so it doesn't make sense for the Delhi Sultanate to be the only ones that have those elephants. But yeah, Ghazi Raiders basically are these religious, you can think of them as like Muslim crusaders almost. They're pushing out into the east, trying to spread Islam towards people that they considered heathens, and a lot of that were people in Afghanistan, the Pashtun region, modern day Pakistan, northern India. They pushed into those regions. There was the Ghurid Empire, and then later on that kind of evolved into the Delhi Sultanate. And if I recall correctly, one of the things that they're famous for is the desecration of a lot of Hindu temples. And so this civilization is seen particularly unfavorably by Hindus. So it would have been interesting instead to see, and also like the fact that Delhi Sultanate is another Muslim civilization, seems like you're lacking a little bit of diversity there. It would have been cool to see either the Rajputs or like the Tamils represented in game. I'm still hoping that in the future that they can add the Tamils. The fact that the Delhi Sultanate has the keeps that turn into town centers, that kind of technology, tells me that they're kind of boxing out the potential of the Rajputs. The Rajputs were famous for having like fortress towns, so it would have been it would have made a lot of sense to give that technology to the Rajputs, but I think we're not gonna have that. We're gonna keep the Delhi Sultanate for now. Yeah, so the emphasis on scholars is weird. The town fortresses is weird. The scholars, I think I mentioned already, is weird. Ghazi Raiders is good. The landmarks, no issues with the landmarks. It would have been nice to see the Tower of Victory, the tower and the Tower of Victory to be a little bit taller, because it's really a quite nice looking tower. Their wonder is the Agra Fort. That's another thing that boxes out the Rajputs. What else is there? Yeah, the emphasis on elephants. I mean, the Delhi Sultanate certainly employed a lot of elephants, so it kind of makes sense. Yeah, I think. Now that I think about it, it's not as bad as HRE. I think I'm gonna place HRE a little bit lower. I don't like a lot of the things that the Delhi Sultan's doing. I don't like how clunky it is to research the technologies. There's no other faction that does something like this, and it doesn't feel necessarily good that like every single time you age up, you gotta scramble through all of your buildings and try to quickly queue up all the technologies. It really robs the decision making from the game, because I feel like there's a bunch of different axes for decision making in this game. It's a strategy game, so you gotta kind of think like what to prioritize, and the technology is another axis. So you gotta think like, do I want to research this econ technology, or do I want to research this military technology? I don't have infinite resources, so I can only choose one. But with the Delhi Sultanate, you're kind of robbed of that decision making. You don't think at all. You just press the button, and it all depends on how fast you can press it, or just as long as you remember to press it, you're gonna be good. There's kind of a balance where you're building the scholars, but in my opinion, this design just really fails on all fronts. And as a result, like, I think the faction itself, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I just feel like the faction lacks flavor. Every time I'm playing it, I'm not like hyped for feeling something. Like even the elephants don't feel like something that I can really prioritize, because early game Delhi Sultan is not about the elephants. You have to get to the late game to start making the elephants more frequently, at least. Like when I play China, I'm excited about booming. When I play bosses, I'm excited about like camels. And French, I got the knights. English, I got the longbows. Mongols, I can't wait to raid people with the Mongol horde. But when I play, and even HRE actually, when I play HRE, I'm like excited about making an infantry mass and running around. But the Delhi Sultanate just kind of lack an identity. They have things related to a little bit of everything. They got some good cavalry. They have archers that can shoot faster because of the Tower of Victory. They got They got the elephants, but it all kind of like doesn't mesh together. Okay, actually, the more I think about it, Delhi Sultanate at the very bottom. They're just not delivering on their thematics. All right, now let's move on to the two latest civs, the Malians and the Ottomans. The Malians, okay, this is going to be a little bit controversial, but I think I'm going to place the Malians also at the very bottom. There are things that the Malians are doing right, and a lot of things that they're doing wrong. The things that they're doing right is, one, I'm really glad the Malians are represented in game. They're oftentimes, a lot of historical games will overlook the empires of Africa, and I think that might be due to a little bit of racism, but also a lot of it's just due to the fact that people don't really know anything about the empires of Africa, so these things aren't going to sell. And so I think we could all kind of use a little bit more education to learn more about these empires, because there was some really cool shit happening in these empires. So I really love that the Malians were represented, and I love that they came for free. I love the pit mines. That's a really cool aspect of the Malian design. Building those with the houses is very unique, and it makes sense. Historically, the Malians were all about mining gold, salt, trading across the Saharan desert. So the fact that they have trade bonuses, and the fact that the toll outposts tax and give bonus food could be a reference to the salt trade. So that all makes a ton of sense to me. But the things that don't make a lot of sense is the way the units look and the way the units are named. So historically, the Malians were all about their cavalry. They're situated on the Sahel, which is kind of like almost like, you can think of it like a steppe grassland, but in Africa. It's in between the deserts of the Sahara and the jungles of the Congo. So there's kind of this transition phase, and that's the Sahel grassland. This place was all about cavalry. There's a lot of empires that got raised up in this region, and they've all been cavalry empires, all about heavy cavalry, very similar to what you see from like the Mongols, for instance, or even like the knightly order that you see in France. The Furima were basically the equivalent of knights. They were kind of like the more powerful warlords in the region, and they would come in on armored horses. And then they would import chainmail from North Africa, and I just don't really feel like that's represented well. In game, they're called sofas, but sofas historically were not cavalry. Sofas were, the term was translates to horse guardians, but they weren't horse guardians because they were horse riders. They were horse guardians because they were literally the servants that guarded the horse, while the Furima were the knights that were fighting on the horse. So it really doesn't make any sense that they would be called sofas. In fact, sofas were more oftentimes like kind of like the slave servants that would serve as the light infantry, the archers. The Mali Empire was famous for two things in their military: the Furima cavalry and their sofa archers. So it's really weird that we don't see that in game. I do like the fact that the archers for Mali have poison arrows. That's really cool. And that's something that they did historically do, because while they didn't have the strongest bows and the sharpest arrows, they did douse their arrows in poison. So it makes a lot of sense as a balancing factor here. Not giving them crossbowmen, that makes sense to me. Giving them javelin throwers also makes some sense. The Malians did fight a lot with javelins. Actually, a lot of the North African cultures fought with javelins. But the javelin thrower design, however, the way their hat is shaped and the designs that they're wearing is very clearly modeled off of Beninese soldiers. And Benin is in the Congo jungle. It's on the Guinea coast. It's a completely separate biome to the Mali Empire, completely separate region. Same thing goes for the Musafati warriors, and as well as the Musafati gunners. All of these units are wielding weapons and helmets and designs that are clearly inspired by the Benin Empire, the Oyo Empire, the Dahomey. These are all the Musafati gunners are very clearly designed off of the Dahomey Amazons, which is a famous unit in the 1800s that famously fought against France. But there's, and it was represented in the movie The Woman King. And that movie was really bad. Not gonna lie, don't recommend it. It's really just poorly directed, and just I don't know why anyone was raving about that movie. I'm glad that the Dahomey Amazons are represented, but that movie is just not entertaining at all. But yeah, in general, like, the Mali faction is just very historically inaccurate, and I've heard that, like, it kind of represents the mercenaries that they would hire. I can sort of buy that, but it also means that we're kind of boxing out the potential of, like, a Ghanaian jungle faction, like something that's actually in the jungle. Like, I would personally love a Benin Empire, and then giving the Benin Empire maybe the Dahomey Amazons and units from other neighboring kingdoms, because at least they're in the same relative biome, in the same relative region. Mali should be about cavalry and grasslands. They also gave Mali, like, stealth bonuses. They have the Keep of the Huntress, I think it's called, or Fort of the Huntress, and it gives stealth bonuses, and the Musafati warriors can stealth. That doesn't make sense. They're in the Sahel. They're in this open grassland plain. Why are they the faction that has the stealth bonuses? Give that to the jungle faction. Give that to Benin. Give that to I don't know, maybe in the future if they add Vietnam, like, Vietnam can have stealth bonuses. That'd be awesome. But I just really feel like there's, like, some weird mixes here, and maybe it was coming from a time when the devs weren't sure if they were going to add more civs. The game performed pretty poorly at launch, so maybe they were like, okay, we'll just, like, we'll do our best representation possible and try to put as much as we can in here. But I really feel like it lost out on a lot of potential here, and it represented a civ that isn't all that historically accurate. Okay, overall, I would say the fact that they at least included the Malians and that some of the designs are pretty accurate. I actually, and the architecture looks amazing. I love that they added the cow mechanic, and I really appreciate that the civ plays really uniquely compared to every other civ in the game. So I'll bump it up. I'll bump it up to a C. But I do hope that the faction can be redesigned in the future. I would love to see griots represented as a unit. They were a unit in AoE3, although griots are also historically very wildly inaccurate in AoE3. In AoE3, the Hausa have griots, and while historically the Hausa did have griots, Mali was more known for their griots than the Hausa. And the griots certainly weren't people who tooted horns at the enemy. They were storytellers. They were oral storytellers and musicians. And Danso is also historically, Danso translates to hunter, and it also doesn't make sense that the Malian spearmen are called Danzos. That's also weird. I would take away the Musafati gunners. I would take away and historically Malian gunners were not all that. They barely used gunpowder. They basically got taken over by the Songhai by the time the gunpowder became a thing, and then the Songhai Empire then lost a war against the Moroccans because they lacked gunners. So it doesn't make sense to give this faction like a special gunpowder unit. It would make much more sense if Mali had griots, and it had Farima cavalry, knights, and it had Sofa archers. I would get rid of the Musafati gunners, get rid of the Musafati warriors, get rid of the Danzo, keep the cows. Cows are great. Most of the landmarks are pretty good. Let's move on to the last civ here, the Ottomans. Okay, I think I lean towards placing them around an A. I like the military schools. I like that this is a faction that is centered around military production. Historically, the Ottomans were very militaristic. They did a lot of conquering. They were one of the biggest empires by the end of this time period. I love the great bombards, the way they look in game. They're fucking massive, and the sound that they make is terrifying. The Janissaries are a little bit lackluster in the game. They have a weakness against archers. I don't understand why that's a thing. The bonus against cavalry is also a little bit random, so I don't quite understand the design behind the Janissaries. It's cool that they're available in H3 though, but because Janissaries were, a thing with the Ottomans for a long time. It's a little bit weird, but I can dig it. Love the military schools. I think the architecture for the Ottomans looks amazing. It's very unique. The playstyle is very unique. They don't have a lot of economic bonuses, which I can see what they're going for. To have a civ that has free military units but less economic bonuses, it's a way to create a more unique design, add more diversity to the faction roster here. Let me think. What else do they have that works and doesn't work? Oh, the vizier point system. That's really cool. It kind of reminds me of Age of Empires 3, and the Ottomans were one of the best factions in Age of Empires 3. So, I think that's a pretty inspired choice, actually. And the fact that it grows based on the number of units you produce, I can see it. It makes a lot of sense. Overall, I would say this design's not very clunky. It makes a lot of sense. Thematically, it feels great. Having the Spahi feels really good. The design of the Spahi is a little bit weird though. Historically, I think the cavalry that are actually what the game calls Spahi, based on the appearance, historically were called what were they called? Like a Densi or something like that. There was a different term for them, but basically they were a completely different kind of unit. I think in AOE3 they were the hussar replacement for the Ottomans. Was it Rumeliads? Something like that. But they were they're called Delhis. Yeah. So the Spahi that are represented in game visually look more like Delhis, which the only way I remembered that was because it sounds like meat. It doesn't sound like a warrior name. And historically, Spahi, they did serve as like cavalry sometimes, but they were more oriented towards like heavy cavalry. And Spahi are more famous than the Delhi, so I get why they would want Spahis in the game, but the design just looks a little bit weird. Horse archers were also a really big thing for the Ottomans. I saw in the initial preview stuff that there was going to be horse archers for the Ottomans, or that the Spahi could like maybe switch weapons or something like that. But then they ended up taking that out of the game. I get it. It's okay. Like I can accept the Ottomans not having horse archers. So I think overall, I think I'm happy with this civ design. Let me think if this is the final roster as far as a tier list for the best designed civs. Yeah, actually, I'm happy with this. I think overall this looks pretty good. Might place France above China and the Abbasids, actually. Yeah, I might place this up here because the French design is also quite tight. Actually, now I think about it, they have bonuses to trade and villager production, which I don't quite follow. Maybe the Roost design is more... I think the Roost design is a bit better. I'll put the French design at the bottom. I think this is a good tier list for this. All right, cool. I think this is going to be my final tier list for now. I'm really excited to see how the developers choose to represent the Japanese and the Byzantines, and once they come out, I'll play the heck out of them, and I'll see where they fall on this tier list as well. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening through this. If you got all the way to the end, you're amazing. I don't know how or why you did it, but hopefully this was let me know if you agree or disagree with this list. Again, this is not representative of like which civs are the best in the game, or the most OP or anything like that. This is purely just based on historical accuracy mixed with game feel, mixed with the thematics, the overall vibe of the civ. And yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this and want to see more content like this, let me know as well. And yeah, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. All right, see you guys.